So I think it's fair to say that in the past I've raced against 0% AI a lot. And that's why in this video I'm going to try and beat the lowest difficulty on F1 23 with maximum downforce around the fastest track on the entire calendar. MONZA. Oh, and if this wasn't enough, I'm going to try and complete this challenge from the back of the grid without ERS in only 5 laps. So as you can see here, I'm running the 50-50 wings, and I knew that compared to the AI, I probably had about 80 extra points of downforce, which as you're about to see had pretty wild results. I'm not going to lie, I think I fell asleep at the lights because my reaction time was dreadful, but compared to everyone else, to be fair, Sargent did have a really good start. I then almost managed to spin it in 4th gear, but I just about held the car together and then made my first 2 overtakes by weaving around Daniel Ricciardo and Kevin Magnussen. Now coming up to turn 1, I knew that I had to go up the inside of the AI, so I patiently waited behind Nico Hülkenberg until I could squeeze past him. And by the apex of the first corner, I had made another 4 overtakes. And then going through the first chicane, I managed to get around the outside of Esteban Ocon and Valtteri Bottas, so I was already up to 12th place. And now this is where I started to realise that this challenge was definitely not going to be as easy as I once thought. So I tried going around the outside of Oscar Piastri through Curva Grande, and I thought this would be an easy move considering at one point I was only 67 thousandths of a second behind him. Well, as you can see, this wasn't the case because at one point I was 7 tenths down. Anyway, through the second chicane, I knew this was where I had to use my maximum downforce to my advantage, and I made a massive dive bomb on only 2 cars. And after only 5 corners, I was already into the top 10 of the Grand Prix, so maybe I was just overreacting. So after this, I made an overtake on Lando Norris, but as you can see, he managed to get back past me pretty much straight away. So at this point, I knew that a lot of this race was just going to be me losing on the straights and then overtaking in the corners, but luckily for me, I was making up more time in the corners than I was losing on the straights, so I knew that I could definitely still win the race. So next up would have been Alex Albon, but stupidly, I didn't try and go up the inside of him, leaving Parabolica, and on the exit, I was just held up. This was because I thought it would be smarter to go around the outside of him. Well, this wasn't the case, and I had just been re-overtaken by Lando Norris. Brilliant. Honestly, this is where I started to get worried that this challenge wasn't going to be possible. The fact that I couldn't use ERS was definitely costing me so much time because I simply could not stay ahead of Lando. So the exact same story happened leaving Parabolica, and honestly, I knew that the first chicane was massive for my race. This was because I could gain so much time on Lando by just braking that much later. So for some reason, I tried to go around the outside of Lando coming into turn 1, and I probably should have got massive damage, but I managed to eventually get past him, and even though I momentarily got held up by Alex Albon, I managed to finally escape Lando Norris. So after this, I knew that I had to get a move on, because considering I was in 10th after just 5 corners, I was now 1 lap and 5 corners in, and I had only made up 1 place, which was definitely not ideal. Next up was the second chicane, and I was now desperate to start making some overtakes. Alex Albon was up next, and he was somehow being held up by Sergio Perez, so I knew that I had a really good chance to make an overtake. I broke about 100 metres later than him, but looking back, he just left the door wide open for me, which was ideal. And I now had 3 proper corners to try and get away from him. Next up was the 2 Lesmos, and they went brilliantly. I managed to get past Sergio Perez on the exit of the first Lesmo, and then on the exit of the second Lesmo, I had a much better exit than Carlos Sainz. And eventually, I actually managed to get past Carlos Sainz, which put me into the top 6 of the Grand Prix. Unsurprisingly, he did actually manage to get back past me, but I did actually hold off Sergio Perez coming into Ascari. Going through Ascari, I actually went round the outside of Carlos Sainz, but I had to momentarily brake on the exit of the corner to avoid a warning. Looking back, I probably should have taken this warning, but this would have put me up to 2 warnings, and I really didn't want to take this risk at this point in the race. So for the next half a lap, I knew that I had no way to defend against these two. Honestly, the thing that I was most worried about in this race was that Max Verstappen was getting away at the front. And the problem was that the Red Bull is the fastest car in the straight line, so I knew that he would be very difficult to overtake. Coming through Parabolica, I had already been overtaken by Sergio Perez, but I managed to get back past him on the exit and got into the slipstream of Carlos Sainz. But once again, this would not be enough. However, just like last lap on Lando Norris, I knew that I could make a huge difference to my race going through the first chicane. So of course, coming into the corner, I just broke so much later than the 0% AI. I got past Checo before the apex, and then I was side by side with Carlos Sainz going through the chicane. To be honest, I kind of cut Carlos off going through the chicane, but in the end it didn't make much of a difference. This was because I had so much more of a better exit than him, and I'd finally escaped these two. So we'll quickly go through this part of the lap, but going through the second chicane, I gained so much time on Lewis Hamilton. And coming up to the first Lesmo, I knew that I could make an overtake here. I went around his outside, and now into the second Lesmo, I was side by side with him, and I got a much better exit. And this was where I knew that I could make a huge difference for my race. I had managed to get DRS for the first time, and this gave me a little advantage that I desperately needed, and going into Ascari, I had managed to stay ahead of Lewis. Next up was George Russell and Charles Leclerc, and going through Ascari, I tried to set myself up for a good exit, and this worked out horribly. I was cut off by George on the exit, so I had to let off the power, and then in 5th gear, I quite literally forgot to upshift to 6. Yeah, this was so stupid, and it brought Lewis back into contention for 5th place. So coming up to Parabolica, he unsurprisingly managed to get past me, but thankfully I would get DRS off Lewis, and I thought this would help me along the main straight. Well, as you can see, I went around the outside of Lewis on the exit of Parabolica, parabolica, and I was hoping that I would have done enough with DRS and a little bit of slipstream from George Russell up ahead to permanently get past him. So this is where I started to get worried. Let's be honest, the Mercedes W14 definitely isn't the fastest car on a straight line, and I was absolutely destroyed by Lewis Hamilton without DRS. But thankfully I knew that I would get past him into the first corner, but I also knew that I couldn't keep relying on the first corner because I wouldn't make enough overtakes to win the race. On the exit of the first chicane, I managed to get past Charles Leclerc and just for a moment get past George Russell, but that didn't last for long. However, this was the closest I'd been to a car leaving the first chicane, and I knew that I had to make some overtakes soon. So I decided to set myself up for a move on both of these cars coming into the second chicane, and I knew that I had to make this count. So to be honest, I kind of just barred Charles out of the way, and then I sent it up the inside of George. This worked out perfectly because I took the second chicane really well, and I now knew that I was in contention for the win. Onto the Lesmos, and I was desperate to try and get past Fernando Alonso. However, on the exit of the first Lesmo, I just pushed too hard and I just about avoided spinning. Anyway, we'll quickly go through this part of the race because there was no way I was going to be able to stay with Fernando with the speed difference that we had along the straights. Now we're coming into Parabolica, and this was huge for my race. I knew that I wouldn't be able to stay ahead of Fernando along the main straight, but if I could get ahead of him into the first chicane, I would have a full lap to try and get up to Max Verstappen and ultimately try and win. And to be honest, that's pretty much what happened. Fernando flew past me, I set another fastest lap of the race, and then I went up his inside. Thankfully for me, I would get away from him leaving the first chicane. I was now fully focused on catching up to Max Verstappen, but my main problem was that I had only made overtakes into 2 corners in the top 10. So this was the first chicane and the second chicane. Obviously, we've just gone through the first chicane, and the second chicane looks unlikely because of how far away he is. Right, so we'll quickly go through this part of the race, but I was gaining on Max very quickly. I set a purple sector 1, and coming up to the Lesmos, I was so close to Max. I tried to slingshot it around him on the exit of Lesmo 1, but I eventually got past him on the cutback, but then for some reason I gave him DRS, and you can guess how this is going to end up. So I was ahead of Max into Lesmo 2, and I got a really nice exit out of the corner, but now you're going to see a rocket ship versus an absolute tractor with 50-50 wings. I mean, this is just a joke. I was 7 and a bit tenths ahead at one point, and he overtook me as if I'm driving a Volvo. However, this Volvo had an extra rear wing attached to it, and I flew past Max in the braking zone into Ascari. And then going through these set of corners, I knew that I had to nail them so I could distance myself as much as possible from him if I wanted any chance of winning this race. Max was half a second behind me on the exit, so I knew that he was going to get past me, and I knew that I had to have a plan to win this race. My plan was to try and get a better exit out of Parabolica and try and stay ahead of him till the finish line, but my problem was that he may re-overtake me. So I got around the outside of Max, leaving Parabolica, so that was step 1 complete. But I had to brake slightly more on the exit to avoid a warning, and I was worried that he may just about get me. But thankfully he didn't, and I had just completed the 50-50 wings challenge around Monza in only 5 laps. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'm sorry if I sound dreadful. I've had a blocked nose for a week and I did really want to upload a video. By the way, a 500 lap video is coming next week, and it is a banger, trust me, I've already started recording for it.